All right. Welcome, everybody. We are starting in with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 7, Discourse 3. So this is in the story of Hiranyakashipu and Narasingha. We just finished the long conversation between Hiranyakashipu and his mother and some of his other family members, consoling them about the death of his brother, her younger son. And now we're kind of launching into his conquests of vengeance, essentially. Discourse 3 is Hiranyakashipu asks a number of boons. Narada resumed, since it was Devarishi Narada who was narrating this story to Yudhishthira. Narada resumed, Hiranyakashipu, O king, wished to make himself invincible, free from old age and death, and the sole monarch of the three worlds, having no rival. In the valley of Mount Mandara, he practiced asceticism of the severest type, keeping his arms lifted up and his gaze fixed on the sky and touching the ground with his great toes. In other words, his great toes only. With the splendor of his matted locks, he shone as the sun with its rays at the time of final dissolution. While he was practicing tapasya, the devas returned to their abodes. They had fled Svarga in advance, fearing that they would be attacked by him there, but since they can see he's occupied, they go home. The smoky fire of asceticism sprung from the crown of his head, spread on all sides, and began to scorch the higher and the lower worlds, as well as the intermediate region. The rivers and the oceans swelled, the earth with its main divisions and mountains shook, stars and planets shot out. In other words, referring to omens like the ill omens of shooting stars and strange celestial apparitions. And all the 10 directions flamed forth. Scorched by that fire, the devas again left Svarga and went to the realm of Brahma and submitted to the creator. Tormented by the tapasya of the chief of the Daityas, O God of gods, O Lord of the universe, we can no longer stay in Svarga. Devise some remedy against it, O perfect one, if you think fit, before the worlds that bear tributes to you perish, O universal Lord. The following is his avowed purpose in practicing the austerities so hard to perform. Although it is not unknown to you, yet listen to what is being submitted. Having evolved this mobile and immobile creation by virtue of his devotion to asceticism and yoga, the supreme deity Brahma occupies his abode in Satyaloka, higher than all other spheres. Through increasing devotion to austerities and yoga, and because time and the soul are eternal, they're putting words in Hiranyakashipu's mouth, I shall likewise secure that very position for myself. By strength of asceticism, I shall change the world order so completely as to make it different from what it was before. What shall I do with other spheres, such as the realms of Vishnu and so on, which are destroyed by time at the end of a kalpa? We hear of his resolution in this behalf, and it is with this intention that he has undertaken austerities of the severest type. Do yourself at once what is advisable, O Lord of the three spheres. Your supremely exalted position, O Lord of the universe, is conducive to the growth, happiness, prosperity, protection, and triumph of the Brahmanas and the cows. Thus addressed by the Devas, O Raja, and accompanied by the sage Bhrigu Daksha and others, the glorious self-born Brahma went to the hermitage of Hiranyakashipu, the lord of the Daityas. He did not at first find the Daitya, who was covered all over with anthills, grass, and bamboos, and whose fat skin, flesh, and blood had been consumed by ants. Brahma, who was mounted on a swan, was amazed to see him, when he eventually did see him, scorching the worlds with his tapasya, like the sun wholly screened by clouds, and spoke laughingly. Brahma said, Arise, arise, O son of Kashyapa. May good betide you. You have achieved your purpose through austerities. I, the bestower of boons, have come over to you. Any boon desired by you may be asked. I have witnessed this extraordinary and marvelous stamina of yours, that your body, having been eaten away by gnats, Your life actually hangs on your bones. Neither did the former sages practice such asceticism, nor will the coming ones do it. Indeed, who can support life without water for 100 celestial years, which is 36,000 Earth years? Through this perseverance of yours, hard to practice even for those who have controlled their mind, I have been conquered by you, intent as you are on austerities. O delighter of Diti. Diti is his mother. Therefore, I bestow on you all your desired blessings, O chief of the Daityas. My sight, immortal as I am, cannot go in vain for you, immortal. Narada continued. Having spoken thus, the firstborn deity sprinkled the Daitya, whose body had been eaten away by ants, with the water of his kamandalu. The kamandalu is the water pot held by all Brahmins. It's made of wood or coconut shell, containing blessed water. Water which was supernal in substance and of unfailing virtue. From the ant hill covered by bamboos, Hiranyakashipu then emerged like fire from fuel, endowed with potency of mind, keenness of the senses, and strength of body, perfect in all limbs, possessed of an adamantine frame, youthful and brilliant as molten gold. Perceiving the god Brahma mounted on a swan standing in the air, the Daitya greeted him with his head resting on the ground, transported with joy at his sight. Rising with joined palms in a suppliant posture, and gazing at the powerful god with unwinking eyes, he offered praises in faltering words with tears of joy and hair standing on end. Hiranyakashipu said, Hail to the all-pervading Supreme, the ground of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, who self-effulgent as he is, manifests by his native splendor this universe, enveloped at the end of a kalpa and blinding tamoguna evolved by time, and who by his own self, associated with the three gunas, creates, protects, and destroys it. Salutations to the first cause, who is an embodiment of both knowledge and wisdom, and who has manifested himself in the form of the vital airs, the indriyas, which are the five senses of perception and the five organs of action, the mind and intellect, and the elements. You rule over the mobile and immobile creation with the prana, the foremost of the five vital airs, and are the lord of created beings. You are the controller of their reason and consciousness, as well as of the mind and the indriyas, and are supreme, being the ruler of the elements and their properties, the internal senses, as well as of cravings. Through your body in the form of the three Vedas and the science of rituals conducted with the help of four officiating priests, the Hota, Advaryu, Udgata, and Brahma priests, who are the four main categories of priests of Vedic yajnas, you popularized the 7 types of sacrificial performances, those being the Agnishtoma, Atyagnishtoma, Ukta, Shodashi, Atiratra, Aptoryama, and Vajapaya yajnas. You are the soul as well as the inner controller of embodied beings, for you are omniscient, indivisible, without beginning or end, and unlimited. You alone are the unwinking time, and shorten the duration of life of men by your divisions, such as a lava. A lava is 1/16 of the length it takes to blink an eye. It's just picking up, he's choosing an example of a very small unit. You are the immutable self, occupying the most exalted position, birthless and all-pervading, the life-giver and controller of the animate creation. There is nothing apart from you, cause or effect, mobile or immobile. Nay, all the branches of knowledge and sciences auxiliary to the Vedas are your bodies, for you are Brahman, holding the entire universe within you, existing beyond Prakriti. This visible universe, O all-pervading Lord, is your physical body, with which you enjoy the objects of the senses, the vital airs, and the mind, though continuing in your most exalted state, while you are the unmanifest spirit and the most ancient person. Hail to that Almighty Lord, endowed with the faculties of illumination and obscuration, by whom in his infinite and unmanifest state all this stands pervaded. If you will confer on me my desired blessings, O chief among the bestowers of boons, let not my death occur at the hands of living beings created by you, O Lord. Let there be no death indoors or outdoors, by day or by night, even from anyone else than beings of your creation, and even through weapons, neither on earth nor in the air, neither from men nor from animals, nor should I meet my death at the hands of animate or inanimate objects or beings, devas, asuras, or nagas. Grant me the boon of having no adversary in battle, as well as undisputed lordship over all embodied beings, towering glory like your own in the midst of all the guardians of the spheres, and unfailing mystic siddhis enjoyed by those who have risen to preeminence through austerities and concentration of mind. Thus ends the third discourse, entitled Hiranyakashipu Asks a Number of Boons, in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 4, Hiranyakashipu's atrocities and Prahlada's virtues recounted. Narada began again. Thus solicited and pleased with the asceticism of Hiranyakashipu, Brahma then conferred on him boons which are most difficult to obtain. Brahma said, "These boons, my child, which you seek of me, cannot be easily secured by living beings. Nevertheless, I confer, O dear one, those very boons, though difficult to obtain." The glorious and mighty Brahma of unfailing grace thereupon returned to his abode, worshipped by the foremost of the Daityas and being extolled by the Prajapatis. Having thus secured boons and acquiring a golden effulgent form, the Daitya nursed a grudge against the Lord Vishnu, not Brahma, constantly recollecting as he did the death of his brother, Hiranyaksha, who Vishnu killed. Having completely subjugated all the quarters as well as the three spheres, and having conquered and brought under control the Devas and Asuras, rulers of men, Gandharvas, birds of the species known by the name of Garuda. So Garuda is the Vahana of Narayana, but there's also a whole race of bird-like divine beings, of which he is the Raja. Sometimes they're referred to as Garudas after him. Their other name is Suparnas. And Nagas, Siddhas, Charanas, and Vidyadharas, rishis, the chiefs of the Pitris, they're the spirits of the unincarnate ancestors, the Manus, the lords of the Yakshas, Rakshasas, and Pishachas, the leaders of the Pretas and Bhutas, these are all different types of spirits, as well as the rulers of all other species of living beings. The Mahasura, who had conquered the universe, now usurped the thrones of the guardians of the spheres along with their glory. He established himself in Svarga, enriched with the beauty of the celestial garden Nandana, and took up his residence in the palace of the mighty Indra, built by Vishvakarma himself, the abode of the wealth of all the three worlds and rich in all luxuries, where there are stairs of corals, floors of most precious emeralds, walls of crystals, and rows of pillars of cat's eyes, canopies of various designs and wonderful workmanship, thrones of rubies and beddings white as the foam of milk and fringed with festoons of pearls, and where celestial ladies possessed of charming teeth and producing a sweet sound with their jingling anklets here and there, see their pretty faces reflected in the pavements of precious stones. In that palace of the great Indra reveled the mighty and proud Hiranyakashipu, who had conquered the worlds and was their sole monarch, whose feet were respectfully tended by devas and others severely oppressed by him, and who ruled with a strong and iron hand. Upon him, O dear one, who remained inebriate with strong-smelling wine and whose coppery eyes ever kept rolling through intoxication, who was a reservoir of tapasya, yoga and strength of body and acuteness of the senses, waited with presents in their hands all the protectors of the worlds, barring three, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Him who had occupied the throne of the great Indra by force, glorified Vishvavasu and Tumburu and singers such as myself. Narada is telling the story that Narada and these other singers were welcome bards in Hiranyakashipu's court, at least at first. Gandharvas and Siddhas, as well as rishis, Vidyadharas, and Apsaras, O son of Pandu, extolled him again and again. Propitiated by men belonging to the different varnas and ashramas through sacrifices with liberal gifts, he alone appropriated the sacrificial offerings by his own might. The earth consisting of its 7 dvipas yielded to him its produce unplowed. Even so, heaven showered everything desired, while the sky presented many a wonderful phenomenon. The oceans, full of salt water, wine, clarified butter, sugarcane juice, curds, milk, and pure water, respectively, as well as the rivers falling into them, bore heaps of jewels on their waves. Mountains provided him with a pleasure ground in the shape of their valleys, while trees bore him flowers and fruits in all seasons. He singly possessed all the distinctive qualities of the guardians of the spheres. Having thus conquered the quarters, the Daitya did not feel satiated, even though enjoying as he pleased his beloved objects, since he had not been able to subdue his senses and mind. In this way, a considerable time slipped past Hiranyakashipu, who, having been subjected to an execration by the Brahmanas, Sanaka and his three brothers, was arrogant and drunk with power and pelf, and violated the Shastras. Unnerved by his stern rule and finding no shelter elsewhere, the inhabitants of all the worlds, along with their guardian deities, resorted to the immortal Lord for protection, and prayed as follows. Salutations be to that quarter where resides the almighty Sri Hari, the universal spirit, and on reaching which the pure-hearted recluses of tranquil mind do not return. With their mind and intellect controlled and rid of impurities, they waited upon the controller of the senses with the aforesaid prayer, remaining without sleep and subsisting on air. A voice without form and deep as the rumbling of clouds was heard by them, filling the quarters with its echo and bringing with it assurances of safety to the righteous. Do not be afraid, O jewels among devas. May good betide you all. My sight is undoubtedly conducive to the attainment of all blessings for created beings. So this is actually a good example. The word translated as sight here is darshan, which does literally mean sight, but it essentially means holy presence. So here, hearing one's voice, even if they're invisible, is considered to count as darshan. It's an example of how it's not sight in a strictly literal sense. My darshan is undoubtedly conducive to the attainment of all blessings for created beings. The wickedness of this vile demon is known, and I shall put an end to it. Wait till then. When hatred develops in the mind of an individual towards the gods, the Vedas, the bovine race, the Brahmanas, and pious souls, nay, towards righteousness and myself, the fellow surely perishes before long. When the demon seeks to harm his own high-souled son, Prahrada, who is free from animosity and extremely calm, I shall slay him, even though he is powerful by virtue of wounds. Narada continued, thus addressed by the Jagadguru, and bowing down to him, the denizens of Svarga, who were now free from anxiety, returned and accounted the demon as already slain. Foremost marvelous sons were born to that ruler of the Daityas. Prahrada, a votary of exalted souls, was preeminent among them in point of virtues. Devoted to the Brahmanas, rich in amiability and true to his word, he had his senses under control and was the unique, beloved friend and the greatest well-wisher of all living beings as their own self. Meaning he saw all living beings as his own self. Like a servant, he bowed low at the feet of the venerable. Like a father, he was kind to the poor. He was affectionate like a brother to his equals, and looked upon his elders as God himself. Though endowed with learning, wealth, personal charm, and high birth, he was altogether free from pride and arrogance. Always unperturbed at heart in the midst of calamities, he had no craving for sense objects seen or heard of, since he looked upon them as unreal. He had not only controlled his senses, breath, body, and intellect, but he had thoroughly conquered his desires. Though a Daitya, he had relinquished the characteristics of a demon. The qualities of exalted souls in him, O Raja, are constantly imbibed by the wise and are not obscured even now, any more than the excellences present in the Lord. Even devas, his enemies, O Raja, treat him as a model in their assemblies holding discourses on the lives of pious souls. What wonder then that others like you should do it? It is futile to recount his excellences, which are innumerable. The greatness of Prahrada, in whom could be seen a natural affinity for Lord Vasudeva, is only hinted at. Having laid aside playthings even as a child, Prahrada, who looked like a dunce by reason of his mind being absorbed in the Lord, and whose soul was, in other words, he's extremely absent-minded from his worldly surroundings, and whose soul was possessed by Lord Sri Krishna as though by some spirit, did not view the world as such. Sitting or walking, eating or drinking, lying down or speaking, he was never conscious of these acts, finding himself constantly folded in the arms of Lord Govinda. Now he would cry, his mind overwhelmed with the thought of Lord Vishnu. Now he laughed, and full of delight at his thought, he would now sing his praises at the pitch of his voice. Now he shrieked with open throat, and now he would dance, casting all bashfulness to the winds. Now imagining himself to be the Lord and completely merged in him, he imitated his doings. Enraptured by the thought of having become one with him, he would now sit mute, with the hair on his body standing erect, and his half-closed eyes brimful with tears of joy brought by constant love. By devoted service to the lotus feet of the Lord of excellent renown, obtained as a reward of the fellowship of devotees, claiming nothing as their own, he not only brought supreme felicity to himself, but also soothed the minds of others, miserable through evil inclination, meaning attachment to the pleasures of sense, as the others around him were. It was such an illustrious and high-souled son, a great devotee of the Lord, O Yudhishthira, that Hiranyakashipu sought to harm. Yudhishthira submitted. O celestial sage of excellent vows, we are anxious to know from you wherefore Prahlada's father actually inflicted suffering on his innocent and righteous son. Fathers fond of their sons do admonish their refractory sons in order to correct them, but in no case do they persecute them as an enemy would. Much less would they oppress obedient and pious sons like Prahlada, who look upon their father as a deity. Remove this curiosity of ours, O Holy One, as to how the hatred of the father for his son was directed towards the latter's death, my lord. Thus ends the fourth discourse, forming part of the narrative of Prahlada in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Just to explain the name of Prahlada, more often it's heard as Prahlada with a la. It varies in the old manuscripts, whether it's written, the conjunct letter is very similar in the Devanagari script, of the conjunct of a ha with a la or a ha with a ra. In a lot of the old handwriting, they look very similar. And so modern renditions usually choose one or the other, but they're forms of the same name. Discourse 5, Hiranyakashipu attempts the life of Prahlada. Narada began again. We are told that the glorious sage Kavya was chosen by the Asuras to the office of their priest. His two sons, Shanda and Amarka, lived close to the palace of the ruler of the Daityas. They taught subjects that were worth teaching to Prahlada, who had been sent to them to learn from them by the Raja, and though a child was skilled in reasoning, as well as to other children of the Asuras. Prahlada, listened to and immediately reproduced what was taught to him by his teacher there. But at his heart he did not approve of it, based as it was on the false notion distinguishing a friend from a foe. Placing his son on his lap one day, the ruler of the Asuras, O son of Pandu, addressed him, "Tell me, my child, what you regard as good." Prahlada replied, "For embodied souls whose mind is ever disturbed with the false ideas of I and mine, I hold this to be good, O chief of Asuras, that having abandoned one's home, which degrades one's soul and is just like a well whose mouth is hidden, in other words, a hidden danger, one should go to the woods and take refuge in Srihari." Narada continued. On hearing the words of his son, full of faith in Lord Vishnu, the Daitya laughed and said, "The intellect of youngsters is perverted by the machinations of others. Let the child be properly guarded so that his intellect may not be perverted by Brahmanas devoted to Vishnu and living incognito at the Guru's residence." Summoning Prahlada, who had been brought back to their residence, the priests of the Daityas praised him and duly questioned him in a soft language and in coaxing words. "Child Prahlada, may good betide you. Speak the truth and do not tell a lie. Whence this perversion of your intellect, which is not to be found in other boys? Tell us your teachers, anxious as we are to hear, O delight of your race, whether the aberration of your mind has been brought about by others, or it has come about by itself." Prahlada replied, "Hail to that Almighty Lord, by whose Maya has been brought about the false notion that he is one's own and he is another, which is observed in men whose mind is deluded. When he is propitious, the false notion in men, embracing the distinction that another is he and another am I, which is generally found in beasts, is dispelled. That spirit itself is described as one whose ways cannot be easily comprehended by those that are laboring under the misapprehension that he is my own and he is another, and in whose quest even exponents of the Veda, such as the Creator, get bewildered. Indeed, it is he who is responsible, he who is responsible for it, who is responsible for my attitude. As iron, O Holy One, moves of itself in the vicinity of a magnet, so is my mind unaccountably drawn towards Lord Vishnu, who holds the Sudarshana chakra in one of his four hands. Narada went on. Having said this much to the Brahmana, Prahlada stopped speaking. Reprimanding him, that poor Brahmana then angrily said, "Oh, bring me a cane. The boy is bringing us into disrepute. The fourth expedient of punishment has been prescribed for this silly chap who is proving to be the ruin of his race. He has borne a veritable thorny bush in the forest of Diti's sons, who are like so many sandal trees. The urchin has served as a handle to the axe in the form of Vishnu, cutting at the root of that forest." Thus intimidating him with threats and various other expedients, the Guru taught Prahlada only texts dealing with the first three objects of human pursuit, meaning with dharma, artha, and kama, but never moksha. Thinking that the boy had mastered the four expedients worth knowing. The four expedients are ways of dealing with an enemy. The first being speech, being negotiation. The second being gifts or bribery. The third being coercion and sowing seeds of dissension. And the fourth being force. The Guru later on ushered the boy, when he had been washed and adorned by the mother, into the presence of the ruler of the Daityas. Greeting with benedictions the child fallen at his feet, the Daitya kept him folded in his arms for a long time and derived supreme gratification from hugging his son. Placing the infant on his lap, obviously it's not placing him on his lap as he would an infant, he's obviously no longer an infant, and smelling its head out of affection, and bathing it with tears, he spoke as follows to the boy, whose face was beaming with delight, O Yudhishthira. Hiranyakashipu said, "Prahlada, dear, repeat something excellent that you have learned from your teacher all this time, O long-lived one, and which you have fully mastered." Prahlada replied, "To hear the names, praises, and stories of Lord Vishnu and chant them, to remember him, to wait upon him, to offer worship and salutation to him, to dedicate one's actions to him, to cultivate friendship with him, and to offer one's own body as well as one's dependence and belongings to him. If devotion marked by these 9 features is practiced by a man as something already offered direct to Lord Vishnu, I reckon that to be the highest learning." Hearing this observation of his son, Hiranyakashipu then spoke to the son of his guru as follows, his lips quivering through rage. "O vile Brahmana, having espoused the enemy's cause and disregarding me, what is this nonsense that the child has been taught by your wicked self, O fool? Indeed, there are in this world impious souls who have assumed the deceptive garb and whose friendship is of a vicious type. Like the malady of the sinful, their mischief comes to light at the proper time." The Guru's son replied, "This son of yours, O enemy of Indra, is saying something which has neither been taught by me nor by anyone else. This view is natural with him, O king. Curb your anger, do not lay the blame at our door." Narada resumed. Thus replied to by the Guru, the Daitya addressed his son again. "If this vicious idea of yours has not been imbibed from the mouth of your Guru, whence has it come, O inauspicious one?" Prahlada submitted, "The mind of those who are devoted to their home, who fall into the hell-like whirlpool of transmigration because of their unsubdued senses and are engaged in enjoying over and over again the pleasures they have already enjoyed, does not get attached to Lord Sri Krishna either by itself or through others, or through mutual efforts. Indeed, they whose mind is impure and who, like the blind led by another blind man, esteem those regarding the external objects as their aim, are unable to realize Lord Vishnu, the goal of those who recognize him as the supreme object. Through actions, they remain bound to the rope of the Lord in the shape of his word, with numerous strings in the shape of different denominations. The mind of these people fails to approach the feet of Lord Vishnu of infinite strength, the object of approaching which is to get rid of evil, so long as it does not seek a bath in the dust of feet of exalted souls who claim nothing as their own. Hiranyakashipu, whose intellect had been blinded by wrath, threw his son from his lap to the ground as soon as the latter stopped after uttering the aforesaid words. Possessed by indignation and anger, and with bloodshot eyes, he exclaimed, "Let this boy be killed at once, deserving of death as he is. Turn him out, O Rakshasas. He is responsible for the death of my brother, for it is this vile fellow who, abandoning his own kith and kin, worships like a servant the feet of Vishnu, the slayer of his uncle. Indeed, what good turn will this wicked boy do to Vishnu either, the boy who yet an infant of 5 years has spurned the love of his parents, hard to renounce? Even an enemy beneficent as a medicine is a son, while an inimical son, though begotten by one's own body, should be shunned as a disease. One should amputate even that limb which is injurious to one's body, and by removing which the rest of the body may survive in good health. He should be got rid of by all means, through food or when he is lying asleep or sitting. Like the corrupt mind of a hermit, he is our enemy, though masquerading as a friend." Actually commanded by their master, those demons who had sharp teeth, fearful faces, and coppery beards and hair, and had spikes in their hands, struck Prahrada, who was sitting, with spears in all his vital parts, emitting hideous yells and shouting, "Cut him down, rend him asunder." Like the commendable acts of an unlucky fellow, their blows proved of no avail against Prahrada, whose mind was in rapport with the immutable and indefinable supreme deity, the soul of the universe. On that effort having been foiled, the ruler of the demons felt greatly alarmed and resorted with pertinacity to devices of dispatching the boy, O Yudhishthira. When the demon failed to get rid of his sinless boy by means of the elephants guarding the quarters, serpents, and destructive spells, by hurling him down from great heights, employing conjuring tricks of black magic, confining him, depriving him of water and food and so on, and administering poison, by starving him, by exposing him to frost, winds, fire, and floods, and even crushing him under rocks, and could not lay his hands on any means to dispose of him. He was plunged in the deepest anxiety, and said to himself, "The boy was reproached by me in a number of ways, and devices were employed to kill him, but he escaped from all those mischiefs and destructive spells by virtue of his own glory. Though standing close to me and a child yet, the fellow is really undaunted in mind and powerful. Like Shunahshepa, he will not forget my wrongs. Possessed of infinite glory and fearing none, he is immortal. My death will surely follow as a result of hostility to him, or else it may not occur." Shunahshepa, who he's referencing, was the second son of a sage named Ajigartha, who, having been sold by his parents in favor of the famous king Harishchandra, the boy joined his father's enemy, the celebrated Vishvamitra, and adopted Vishvamitra's line as his adoptive parentage. So it's a reference to a son so antagonized by his own hostile parents that he defects to their enemy, is what Hiranyakashipu was referencing there. To him, Hiranyakashipu, who sat with his face downward, his splendor having been blasted to some extent by his anxious thought as aforementioned, Chanda and Amarka, the sons of the sage Ushana, as the tradition goes, spoke thus in private: "You have conquered single-handed all the 3 worlds, whose guardians are frightened by the play of your eyebrows. Such as you are, we see nothing for you to be anxious about, O Lord. Indeed, the behavior of children is no topic for judgment as good or bad. Until, however, your guru," meaning our father, the son of Bhrigu, "comes back, keep the boy bound with the cords of Varuna, so that he may not abscond through fear. A man's reason returns with age, as well as through the service of exalted souls." Having accepted the advice of the sons of his guru, saying, "Let it be so," Hiranyakashipu spoke as follows: "As a matter of fact, such duties should be taught to him as are proper to rajas leading the life of a householder. To Prahrada, who was not only modest but meek as well, O Raja, they always taught in the proper order only dharma, artha, and kama. Prahrada did not approve of the three objects of human pursuit, even when properly taught to him by his teachers, much less the teaching imparted by those who feasted their mind upon the object of sense through feelings of attachment and aversion, etc. When the Guru was away in connection with his household duties, Prahrada was called there for play by boys of his own age, who had found time to make merry. Answering their call in sweet words, Prahrada, who was aware of their devotion to him, then kindly addressed them as though smiling. Laying aside playthings out of respect for him, however, all those boys, whose judgment had not been vitiated by the precepts and actions of those who delighted in sense enjoyments through feelings of attachment and aversion, etc., sat round him, O King of Kings, with their heart and eyes fixed on him. And the Asura, who was an eminent votary of the Lord and who was compassionate and friendly, spoke to them. Thus ends the fifth discourse, forming part of the narrative of Prahrada in Book 7 in the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 6, Prahrada's teaching to the Asura boys. Prahrada said, in this life, a wise man should practice virtues conducive to God realization in his very childhood. Birth as a human being alone bestows on us our desired object, and such birth is obtained with difficulty and is transient too. The only course advisable for a man in this world is to betake himself to the feet of Lord Vishnu, for he is the ruler and the beloved friend, nay, the very self of all created beings. Like suffering, sensual pleasure, O Daityas, is obtained by embodied beings in every birth by force of destiny, without any effort through connection with a body. No effort for such pleasure should be made. From such effort follows mere waste of life. In that way, one does not attain to the lotus feet of the bestower of liberation, the source of supreme bliss. Therefore, having fallen into transmigration, a clever man should strive for blessedness while the human body is yet sound and does not perish. Indeed, 100 years is reckoned to be the length of a man's life. Half of it is of no use to a man who has not been able to subdue his mind, for consigned to blinding ignorance, he remains lying down during the night. 20 years elapse in infancy, when the fellow remains steeped in ignorance, and in boyhood, when he remains absorbed in play. And 20 years roll by in helplessness when his body is in the grip of senility, from age 80 to 100, roughly speaking. The rest actually passes away in negligence when the man remains attached to his home through desire which cannot be easily sated and through overwhelming infatuation. What man whose senses have not been conquered can hope to liberate his own self, attached to his home and bound with the powerful cords of affection? Who indeed can give up the thirst for wealth, which is coveted more than life itself, and which a thief as well as a servant and a merchant purchases even in exchange for his most beloved life? With his mind attached to his relatives and bound by the affection of lisping children, how can a man forego the private company and sweet friendly counsel of his sympathetic wife? Remembering his sons and those beloved daughters, brothers and sisters, as well as his helpless parents, and dwellings provided with abundant articles of attractive furniture, hereditary vocations, animals, and servants, how can he renounce them? Pursuing actions out of greed like a silkworm, and thinking highly of the pleasures relating to sex and the palate, how can he feel disgusted with them, his desires remaining unsated and his infatuation knowing no bounds? Fond of his family, the careless fellow does not perceive his life wearing away, and his efforts to maintain his family, nor his purpose frustrated. And even though his mind remains afflicted by the three kinds of agony everywhere, he never gets sick of them. Though knowing the sin attaching here as well as hereafter to the man misappropriating others' wealth, the householder whose mind is ever intent on riches, nevertheless takes away others' wealth, his senses being uncontrolled and his desires unsatisfied. Indeed, he who has a differential outlook regarding this as his own and that as belonging to another is not able to realize the self while maintaining his family in the aforesaid manner, O scions of Danu, even though he may be learned. He is likely to enter the dark region, even like a deluded person. Since none who is extremely passionate and a toy dear for the diversion of lustful women, in whom are forged letters in the form of offspring, is ever and anywhere capable of liberating his soul. Therefore, avoiding from a respectable distance, O Daityas, the company of the Daityas, who have set their mind on the objects of senses, take refuge in Lord Narayana, the most ancient deity. He is the final beatitude, the final moksha, sought for by those who have given up attachment. Indeed, there is not much exertion to him who is engaged in propitiating the immortal Lord, O children of the Asuras, he being the very self of all created beings and present everywhere in this world. In created beings, high and low, commencing from the immobile creation, meaning the vegetable kingdom and so on, and culminating in the creator, nay, in all material products, as well as in the gross elements, in the gunas, in prakriti, as well as in the mahatattva, etc., exists the one and only one, transcendent spirit, the almighty and imperishable God. Though really indescribable and undifferentiated himself, he can be hinted at as all-pervading in the form of the subject and as pervaded in the form of the objective universe. The Supreme Lord, consisting of absolute consciousness and bliss, he is realized as having his divinity concealed by Maya, which gives rise to the material creation. Therefore, giving up the demoniac disposition, show compassion and friendliness to all created beings, whereby is pleased Lord Vishnu, who is beyond sense perception. When that infinite being, the cause of all, is pleased, what is there that cannot be attained? And what is the use of our worrying over religious merit, etc., which are attained in this world of their own accord through modification of the three gunas? And what is the use of hankering after final moksha to us who enjoy the nectar of his feet and are ever singing his praises? The triad which has been spoken of is the three objects of human pursuit, dharma, artha, and kama, as well as the science of self-realization, the science of rituals, logic and political science, and the diverse means of earning one's livelihood. All this subject matter of the Veda I regard as true if it enables one to offer oneself to the Supreme Person, one's inner controller. Narayana, the companion of Nara, it is said. So Narayana, not Bhagavan Narayana, but the avatar Narayana, the sage by that name, it is said, taught this well-known and pure wisdom, which cannot be easily attained, to Narada. It can be attained by embodied beings who have bathed themselves in the dust of the lotus feet of those exclusively devoted to the Lord and claiming nothing as their own. This knowledge, with the immediate apprehension of truth, as well as the pure cult of devotion to the Lord, was received by me in the past through hearing from the mouth of the sage Narada, who has seen the Lord. The sons of the Daityas said, Prahlada, you as well as we know no other teacher except these two sons of Shukra, the guru of the Daityas, and indeed these two have been our masters ever since we were mere infants. Association with an exalted soul was difficult when you were an infant within the Gynaeceum, meaning within the royal family quarters of Hiranyakashipu's palace. Resolve our doubt, O gentle one, if there is any ground for giving credence to your words. Thus ends the sixth discourse, forming part of the narrative of Prahlada in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 7, further teaching to the Daitya sons. Narada resumed, questioned thus by the Daitya sons, the Asura, that great devotee of the Lord, smilingly addressed them, calling to mind my teaching, since Narada is saying this. Prahlada began, our father having left for Mount Mandara to practice austerities. So he says our father, even though most of them are not his brothers, the children of Hiranyakashipu, but him being their god, emperor, king, they all kind of are supposed to view him as a father. Our father having left for Mount Mandara to practice austerities, Indra and the other devas launched a great military campaign against the Danavas, saying, fortunately, the evil one, the scourge of the world, has been eaten away by his own sin as a serpent by ants. Perceiving their mighty undertaking and being struck by the devas, the terror-stricken Asura generals, who were all anxious to save their life, hastily fled in every direction, paying no heed to their wife and children, friends and relations, houses, animals, and other household goods. Desirous of victory, the devas looted the king's residence, while the ruler of the devas even seized the queen, my mother. The Devarishi Narada, who came there by chance, saw her being taken on the road, trembling with fear and crying like a female offspring. He peremptorily said, you should not take this innocent lady, O Lord of Devas. Leave, O blessed one, the good woman who has another's wedded wife. Indra replied, there is in her womb the formidable seed of the enemy of the Devas. Let her stay till delivery, I shall let her go when I have achieved my object, which is to kill her child. Narada said, he, the child in her womb, is not only sinless, but a great devotee of the Lord and eminent by his own qualities. This mighty servant of Lord Vishnu will not meet his death at your hands. Thus addressed and accepting the advice of the Devarishi, Indra left her and going round her, out of devotion to me, returned. And so in other words, he performed parikrama around her so as to do so around the devotee who was in her womb. Indra returned to Svarga, which they had temporarily recaptured. Then the sage took our mother with due honor to his own hermitage, the sage Narada, and comforting her said, "Stay here, my daughter, till the return of your husband." She too signified her assent in the words, "So be it," and lived near the celestial sage, free from all fear, so long as my father did not cease from his terrible austerities. For the well-being of her embryo, and in order to deliver it at the desired moment, the virtuous and pregnant lady waited upon the sage in that hermitage with supreme devotion. In order to assuage her grief, and for my sake too, the compassionate and powerful sage imparted both the essence of religion and pure wisdom. That teaching, however, disappeared from the mind of my mother due to the length of time and because of her womanly nature. Its memory has not left me, the favored of the sage, even to this moment. That devotion and wisdom can take root in you too if you give credence to my words. Through faith, such sense as is proficient in uprooting the feeling of identification with the body, etc., can appear even in women and children, as it has dawned on me. Through the agency of time, which is by its very nature capable of bringing about transformation, the 6 well-known states of being, commencing with birth, which are birth, existence, growth, ripeness, decay, and destruction, are seen in relation to the body and not in relation to the soul, just as they are observed in the fruits of a tree and not in the tree itself. I mean, obviously, in the long term, they are observed in the tree itself, but relative to the lifespan of one fruit, the tree appears unchanging, whereas the fruit goes from, sprouting to growing to falling to rotting much faster. The spirit is eternal, free from decay, taintless, one, the knowing subject, the ground, changeless, self-seeing, the cause, all-pervading, unattached, and having no sheath. With the help of these 12 transcendent characteristics of the self, a wise man should give up the false notion of I and mine, sprung from ignorance, with reference to the body and persons and things connected with the body. Just as a goldsmith acquainted with the process of extracting gold from its ore is able through those processes to find gold in the ore existing in gold mines, so is a man well versed in the science of the spirit able to discover the nature of Brahman in the bodies, which are so many fields, through the processes of ascertaining the true nature of the self. By teachers, 8 have been declared to be the causes. 3 are, as a matter of fact, only modes of prakriti. 16 are modifications, and the spirit is spoken of as 1 because of its connection with all. This reference to the 8 causes are Prakriti, Mahatattva, the ego, and the 5 subtle elements. Of course, the body, a concatenation of all of these, is of 2 kinds, a mobile body or an immobile body. All objects being referred to as bodies, even inanimate objects, are considered immobile bodies. It is here that, discarding everything else as not this, the spirit should be sought for by men coolly reflecting on the creation, continued existence, and dissolution of the universe with a mind purified through reasoning on the lines of anvaya, which is the all-pervasiveness of the spirit, and vyatireka, which is the distinctness of the spirit from everything else. Wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep, these are the functions of the intellect. He alone by whom they are cognized is the transcendent spirit, the witness. By means of these modifications of the intellect, products of the 3 gunas, and the result of actions, and which are rejected, One should ascertain the essential character of the spirit through its association with the intellect, even as one comes to know the air through the odors. In fact, metempsychosis, which is perpetuated by the gunas and actions prompted by them, is brought about through the intellect, metempsychosis being the process of reincarnation. Though rooted in ignorance and unreal, it is postulated as a dream. Therefore, the seed of actions prompted by the three gunas ought to be burnt by you. This is yoga, which stops the functioning of the intellect. Of the thousands of devices helpful to it, this alone has been recommended by the Lord, the practice of virtues through which love may be duly and easily developed for the Almighty Lord. This can be accomplished by serving one's guru and by offering with devotion all that is got by one, through the fellowship of pious devotees and worship of God, through reverence for stories of the Lord, by celebrating his virtues and exploits, through contemplation on his lotus feet, and through the sight and worship of his images, and so on. One should duly gratify living beings with their objects of desire under the belief that the Almighty Lord Sri Hari is present in all created beings. In this way, devotion to the all-powerful Lord Vasudeva is practiced by those who have subdued the six senses, devotion through which one fully develops love. When on hearing of his achievements, incomparable virtues and heroic deeds wrought through his forms assumed for sport, the devotee sings loudly with an open throat, and in a voice choked with tears, shouts and dances, his hair standing on end due to excessive delight. Nay, when he, like one possessed by an evil spirit, now laughs, now weeps, now sits in meditation, now greets the people, and now, devoid of shame, exclaims, "O Hari, O Lord of the universe, O Narayana," with his mind fixed on the Lord, and heaving a sigh every now and then, all his bonds get loosened at that time, and his ignorance and latent desires are burnt, and his mind and body being attuned to him through contemplation on the Lord's pastimes, the man attains to Lord Vishnu, who is above sense perception, by recourse to the highest device of devotion. The wise recognize communion with Lord Vishnu as a means in this world of putting a stop to the cycle of birth and death in the case of an embodied soul of impure mind, and they recognize it as identical with the bliss of absorption into Brahman. Therefore, worship that ruler of your heart in your heart. What extraordinary exertion, O Asura boys, is involved in the worship of Sri Hari, one's own self and friend, present in one's own heart, like the space there. What is to be gained through efforts for the acquisition of objects of senses, such efforts being common to all embodied creatures? Riches, wife, animals, sons, and other relations, houses, land, elephants, treasury, and luxuries, all kinds of wealth and enjoyments, are momentary and fleeting. What delight can they afford to a mortal? Similarly, the well-known worlds earned by means of sacrifices are also perishable and excelled by other worlds, and are not free from impurities either. Therefore, with a view to self-realization, worship, with absolute devotion, the Supreme Lord, in whom no fault is seen or heard of. A man accounting himself wise invariably attains results which are quite the opposite of the object aiming at which he performs actions in this world time and again. The aim of a man given to action here is to secure happiness and freedom from misery. But he who is filled with joy due to desirelessness ever reaps misery through desire. The very body for which the jiva hankers after enjoyments through actions performed from interested motives actually belongs to others, in that it is sure to be devoured after death by some creatures or another, or by fire, and hugs the soul for a time and departs. How much more so are one's progeny, wife, house, wealth, and so on, or one's kingdom, treasury, elephants, ministers, servants, and friends that are connected with the jiva only indirectly and are treated as one's own? Of what avail can these trifling things, which are sure to disappear with the body, if not before, and are evils, though appearing as something worth seeking, of what avail can these be to the soul, the very ocean of eternal bliss? Consider what interest can there be in this world, O Asura boys, to the embodied soul, suffering through its actions in all the stages commencing from conception. With the body as its servant, the embodied soul undertakes actions, and with actions molds a future body, inasmuch as both the actions and the body proceed from ignorance. Therefore, worship through desirelessness, the desireless and almighty Sri Hari, your very self, on whom riches, enjoyments, and pious acts depend. Lord Sri Hari is the self, ruler, beloved friend, and inner controller of all living beings, fashioned by gross elements, evolved by himself. Taking shelter under the feet of the bestower of liberation, a deva, asura, human being, or yaksha, or gandharva, bids fair to become blessed as I. Neither birth as a member of the twice-born classes, deva or rishi, nor character, nor versatility, nor charity, nor austerity, nor the performance of sacrifices, nor purity, nor sacred vows are conducive to the pleasure of Lord Mukunda, O Asura boys. Sri Hari is propitiated through unalloyed devotion. All else is empty show. Therefore practice devotion, O Danavas, to the Almighty Lord Sri Hari, the soul of all created beings, by treating every creature as though it were your very self. For there are daityas, yakshas, and ogres, womenfolk, shudras, cowherds, beasts, birds, and those living by sin that have attained immortality. Exclusive devotion to Lord Govinda, which is the same as beholding him in every creature, this alone has been declared to be the highest interest of man in this world. Thus ends the 7th discourse, entitled Teaching to the Daityas, Sons, forming part of the narrative of Prahrada in Book 7 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that might be a good stopping point. We normally go until about 10 o'clock. And the story goes on for some length further, more than we have time for today. And the next part gets into the Narasingha avatar. So I think that's a good break point before we get into the climactic portion of the story.
Perfect.
So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Devala.
Yeah, thank you all. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.